The question is if this bill be enacted a second time. I call the member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, 2010 will be remembered as the year where Australians listening to this debate, either in the gallery or over the media, have witnessed the disintegration of Australia's border protection. And it doesn't matter how much the story is twisted about there being tough times overseas and various countries in various states of decay or struggle, there is the absolute reality that there have always been, over the last decade or two, around 20 million displaced people. And if we look in the UK and acknowledge the number of applications from asylum seekers, those numbers are simply not rising, as this government would put to you. Now, what we have on the other side is a massive scotoma of monumental proportions where, when it comes to border control, simply nothing is going to be done about it. And we can see that. We can see a government so busy giving themselves gold stars, they're not even looking for a solution. And I know that when one slinks back as a member of this place to local electorates, those on the other sides steer well away from talkback radio and steer well away from the pubs and the clubs and the shopping centre car parks, because that conversation is nothing like what you say here. And this government has become almost professionalised in the world of spin, of saying one thing here and doing something completely differently back in your electorate. And it's almost become pathological, so I know you don't even realise you're doing it anymore. But it's become almost impossible for this government to rescue itself from this diabolical death dive that they are in over this policy. Now, let's go back to some real, true facts, because back in the days of Kevin 07, and we all remember the little flags on cars, don't we? It was a time when you picked out 3 or 4 policy issues, and wasn't government going to be easy? 12 years in opposition, plenty of time to come up with some decent policy, but of course by the time you got there, all you did was institute as a government reviews. And when it came to this border protection, it wasn't that easy to be Howard Light during an election campaign, but as soon as the hands got onto the reins and levers of government, suddenly it was all about unpicking for your special interest groups, unpicking the TPV, unpicking the 45-day rule, unpicking detention debt, unpicking and roll-backing any of that commitment that one pretended to have while you're in opposition. And it was out on the media airways while in opposition, we'll turn those boats back. And everyone in the gallery and on the media heard those words. And how close is this Prime Minister Rudd to any of that rhetoric that we heard before this individual was elected? Let's go to the data. And all we have from this Prime Minister is reading out figures about before the Howard government instituted a series of reforms that, acknowledged the world over, made an enormous difference to this disgraceful transnational criminal activity called people smuggling. And it's been acknowledged the world over. And all that this new government had to do was don't play with it. Don't fiddle with the knobs. But it was just too much of a temptation, wasn't it? And bill after bill came through this place, and they thought they'd just gradually drop down the modulation, and you're in government. We'll see what the results were of those actions, Mr Deputy Speaker. And they speak for themselves. Let's go through. Let's go to the record. 2002-03, 0 arrivals. 03-04, 3 arrivals. 04-05, 0 arrivals. 8 arrivals, 4 arrivals, 3 arrivals. But by that time, this government just couldn't resist the temptation, could they? And in they went with their legislative unpicking. And then what do we have to speak of right now? Well, let's look at the figures. 1,100 arrivals this year alone, 42 votes this year alone, 92 since those policies were unpicked and unravelled. These are enormous influxes of individuals hopeful of the sugar that this government provides. And exactly how does that transfer into a country like Pakistan, where Afghans have been living there for a generation? It translates like this. People talk, and they talk about the easiest way in, and they say the soft touch is Kevin Rudd, and they say get those boats out and put a flag up Kevin 07, fly them under that flag and you'll be okay. That's the message that goes through those camps on the Afghan-Pakistan border. You haven't been there. Any of these members, have you been to those border camps? Have you travelled up the Khyber Pass? Have you actually seen those populations in the eastern parts of Afghanistan, whose only hope is to find a country that will potentially take them, and more often than not it is becoming a flight to Indonesia and then a boat trip across. And this government is simply tempting this all along. And I just make a quite simple point as a humble opposition MP, that we almost have a situation where the language here was tough but compassionate and hard line and all of this kind of language speaking out of two sides of the mouth depending on who was listening. And the Australian people are waking up to that. And I'm sure you realise that that's happening as well when you pore over the polls and what language is going to resonate and what won't. I mean, the government can see it. And what just really annoys me is that we've had a debate for the last 12 months on denial, and we know what policy I'm talking about. And this side's definition of denial is when there's vigorous debate on this side of the chamber, just as there is in the community. And that's called denial. Now, of course, there's scepticism throughout the world of science. And so one can be called sceptics. But don't I see true denial over here? Because there is no debate over the data. There is no debate over the arrivals. There's no great scientific debate going on about what's happened to these legislative provisions, all of them broken down by this government, and then the direct cause and effect. I mean, just how blind does one have to be to not see a cause and effect between unravelling the laws and what we are seeing, a veritable armada of boats heading in this direction? So how much does this Prime Minister and this government plan to spend on this problem? Was it $654 million over 6 years? Is it now closer to $1 billion? I mean, I think listeners have a right to ask the question, how much is this going to cost? How much does it cost to incarcerate, to hold, to promise, to judge, to do all of the research and offer all of the appeals? It amounts to close to $1 billion. And we know already that if you take and break those costs up, $81,000 per person, $26,000 per person for customs and border protection. And that's not even to mention the threat and the danger and the risk that this Prime Minister is placing our border protection personnel in. I don't think that they need to be doing this kind of work if a simple legislative solution has proven to work 4 or 5 years ago. But they do. They do it because they serve Australia. They do it because that is their role, their job, their training, and they're proud of doing it. But this is something that there is one individual on this other side, Deputy Speaker, who can fix it with some decent laws. That's all we're asking for here today, and that's why you've got us on this side supporting this bill today. Of course we're going to support the empowerment of ASIO to obtain and correlate and evaluate intelligence and to enable them to be even more front-footed when it comes to identifying individuals who are not only people smuggling, but actually supporting the practice of people smuggling. There will be no argument here. But I think what has been completely missed is that we have a government where there really is no heart in this issue. And you can see it, it's soft and spongy and moist. There's no commitment to this whatsoever, and they just walk both sides of the street saying one thing here to appease the special interest groups and then doing their very, very best to keep it off talkback radio on the other. Look, you can dither, you can deny, one can delay. I mean, all of those options are open to this government, but I'm simply giving a very humble and understated warning that this one ain't going to go away. This one isn't going to simply vanish. You're not going to wake up one morning and someone else is going to come up with a solution because this lot hold the reins of government. And the entire nation turns to Prime Minister Rudd for some evidence that there will be some kind of solution, but you won't be able to keep papering over it. And all of you speakers that are going to follow. And there'll be a range of arguments here that, oh, there's all these push factors and things are terrible in Sri Lanka at the moment and, things are hotting up a little bit in Afghanistan. But this is a trade. It's a criminal trade. It's all entirely funded by people looking to take advantage of the desperate. Never forget that. Never forget what happens on these boats, the appalling treatment. And then we have a Prime Minister, of course, that actually has the hide to crow about disrupting some of this trade in Indonesia and to the nations to the north. And I simply ask the question, what do you do when you disrupt a potential boat that departs? I mean, do these people find their way back home? No. I mean, do they get any processing in Australia? No. Those who are disrupted in Indonesia simply stay in Indonesia and have another crack. They just have to find another $5,000. I mean, that's not humane. But that's not even acknowledged on this side of the chamber. So there's no long-term solution. There's just disruption, leaving them as someone else's problem, hoping the Indonesian president won't speak out about it, and then trying to do some kind of deal to keep the whole thing quiet. But there's no long-term solution. Where's the discussions with the Afghan and the Pakistani government? Where's the action and the bipartisan bilateral approach with Sri Lanka? That's not happening at all. It's all Indonesia's problem, and then you do everything they can on this side of the House in government to simply hope that next boat isn't coming.